Hi, my name is Evelyn, and I'm a grade 12 student at ODSS, and today I'm going to talk about the Battlefields tour, which I went on back in 2018 when I was in grade 10. Hi, Evie from the future here. I actually went in 2019, and I forgot that happened last year. I was looking through pictures, and I was like, oh, this actually happened in 2019, but, so, yeah, take it away, past me. It's a trip for students from OD, Westside, and Center Dufferin from grades 10 to 12. Basically what the trip is you go to France and Belgium for about 2 weeks, and you do a lot of traveling to war monuments, cemeteries, museums, and stuff like that. So it is kind of like a really big history trip, but it's also kind of like a vacation. Definitely not saying that because I loved Paris that much. I don't actually remember a lot of the trip, unfortunately, because it was like 2 years ago and everything that's happened this year just kind of, that's the only thing in my brain. But basically how the trip works is we flew to Paris, stayed there for a few days, went to the Eiffel Tower, did a bunch of cool stuff, and then basically for the next week and a half we were driving on a bus everywhere to a bunch of places in France and Belgium. If you've been going to Remembrance Day services with our church for the last few years, you've probably heard a lot about the Battlefields tour because we talk about it every year. So instead of like giving you guys the whole overview, there's a few things I actually want to talk about specifically that haven't actually been touched on in other years. Because I think it's important that we go to Vimy, Juno, which those are big important places, but there's also other things that we do that we don't talk about. Like we visited a German war cemetery, and it's a lot different from the ones that we're used to, and I just think it's important to touch on that kind of stuff too. One of the things that I remember the most is there was this one monument in, I'm pretty sure it was France. I would do the research, but I don't really have a lot of time to record this, so. And it has the names of every soldier that fought in World War I on it. It's like this giant ring, and they're sorted in alphabetical order by last name. So you can literally go out and find your last name on this thing. It tells you, like, it's really cool. I really don't know how to put it into words, but it was honestly like just one of the coolest things I'd ever seen. Like, it was huge. Like, it took like 2-3 minutes to walk around the entire thing if you weren't stopping and looking. And that was so cool. As I mentioned, we also visited a German cemetery from the First World War, and I think it's important to talk about this because, we're so used to like the Allies. I mean, we know lots of stuff about our involvement in the war and kind of like how we respect our veterans and stuff like that. But the German cemetery was a lot different from the ones that we're used to. I mean, ours are white individual stones that are all facing the sun. The German cemetery that we went to was near one of the first places that mustard gas was used. And it's interesting because it's more of like a mass grave than what we're used to. It's like they have individual black stones that have 7 or 8 names on them. They don't have individual stones. And I thought that was really interesting, just how different they buried their people. Something that I just remembered is that one of the museums, which I'm pretty sure was in Belgium, because it was the same place that had the really good burgers and fries. Forget I said that, but Belgium has better burgers and fries than any other place I bet to. Anyway, there was this museum in one of the cities in Belgium that we went to, and they had this section for, it was stories of soldiers who were gay, and kind of like how they couldn't be open about that because of the time. And I mean, now we're living in a world where that kind of stuff is a lot more accepted, but back then, like, I can't even imagine what it would have been like to, be LGBTQ+. And yeah, there were just these really heart-wrenching stories of soldiers who loved other soldiers, that couldn't be together because they weren't accepted. And I thought that was really cool. You never hear people talk about that. Another thing which was like super cool that we got to see is when we went to Juneau, we were actually invited into Canada House. For those of you who don't know what Canada House is, it is the first place on Juneau that was liberated by the Canadians. And the family that lives there actually let a few tour groups go through and they'll talk about it. We had to have a translator because they speak French. But that was a really cool experience because not a lot of people get to do that. It's invite only to go in there. And so we learned about the history of the house. It's been in the same family. It's shared by two families, and the other family that lives in it actually wants to sell the house. And there's not really much that the people that live in there can do about that. So they're kind of relying on tourists to like spread the word and make sure that the house can stay in the family because, yeah, like the original people that lived in there have died, and now they're renting up the other half of the house. Okay, now I'm gonna talk a little bit about the stuff that you've probably heard every other year, because I loved the trip so much. I love history, so this entire trip was just like, oh my god, this is awesome. There's a lot of places I remember. Can't talk. The two that come to mind when I think of places that we went to on the trip are Beaumont Hamel and Vimy. Vimy is one of the coolest things I think I've ever seen. It is so cool. So cool. It is, first of all, it's huge. So huge. We have a picture of us like sitting on the steps. I'll include that if I can find it. I did not think, in pictures you don't think it's that big. No. It's huge. It's so cool. I'm sorry, I'm like freaking out just thinking about it. Now, as for Beaumont Hamel, it's not as extravagant as Vimy. I don't think anything is as extravagant as Vimy. But to me, Beaumont Hamel was something that I remembered a lot because in history class in grade 10, I actually had to research the Battle of Beaumont Hamel. The story behind Beaumont Hamel is basically there were a bunch of Newfoundlanders that had to go there to fight, and almost all of them were killed in the battle. There's this tree, which is actually still there, called the Danger Tree. If you passed that tree, you were dead. And I really remember that. It was really cool to actually be there after I researched it and I knew the history behind it. And the interesting part is that the land is actually owned by Canada, and they have tour guides there that actually come from Canada. They live in France, and they give tours. Another really cool thing that happened, I know, I'm full of cool things to talk about, is we actually got the chance to visit Notre Dame before it burnt down. It actually burnt down while we were still in France. We saw it 3 days before it burnt down. And I'm so glad I took as many pictures as I did. That was like one of the only places that I took like 100 or so pictures because I was like, wow, this is really cool. I mean, as someone who loved like historical architecture, I was like, so yeah, we actually got to see it before it burned down. And then when we came back in Paris for our last day, 2 days, we saw it burn down. You weren't allowed to go on like the street that it was on because they were still cleaning up. We also went on a cruise, and the cruise actually had to they had to shorten it because they weren't letting people go through the water by the Notre Dame. So yeah, that was just like really cool. So yeah, that's kind of all the interesting little things that I can think of off of just the top of my head. I mean, there's a few other little things, like I cried when we went up the Eiffel Tower. The Mona Lisa is actually really small and not as extravagant as you would expect it to be. France doesn't put salt on their French fries. They put Nutella on everything, though, so you win some, you lose some, I guess. But yeah, that was my Battlefields tour experience, and I hope that I covered what I wanted to talk about well enough for you guys to kind of just understand, like, my personal experience. But yeah, have a great day. Evie out.